Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and I'm joined with Jeff Berkowitz, Public Affairs TV in Chicago. And once again, we're going to be taking a look at some of the issues that have recently come up and are going to be impacting us as we go into 2023. And Jeff, one of the things that has been happening of late, and a developing story, we'll have to follow this into the new year, is what I would say a political disarray within the ranks of the Republican Party. And we see that both at the state level and at the national level. And certainly at the state level, I know from talking to people, people are saying within the Republican ranks that there's just no cohesion, and that it's no wonder that the Republicans lost every statewide election this year.
Well, Terry, you and I are talking to a sample. There's a relatively small sample we know of people who are disgruntled. The State Central Committee, we're taping this on the 14th. The State Central Committee was Saturday the 10th, and people estimate there were 70 to 90 people there. Some people say 200. Who knows? Neither you nor they were there. We've talked to people, but that's still, whether it's 90 or 120, it's a relatively small group, and these folks are upset with this, with the way the election turned out. Of course, most Republicans across the state of Illinois, across the country, are upset with the way the elections turned out. So the daggers are out. Who to blame? What to do to change? A lot of that is healthy. If you can make healthy changes, if you can do postmortems that you learn from, that's fine. If you just engage in name calling, probably not going to help things a lot. So let's discuss it and see what we can figure out.
So one of the things, let me bring up, this is a shot of the meeting that happened this last Saturday. And it's a Central Committee meeting. It was held, I think, in the, well, certainly the suburb area, Bolingbrook, right? I couldn't think of the name. And one of those who attended, now, as you see sitting at the table, that's the Republican Illinois State Central Committee. As you say, somewhere between roughly, let's call it 100 to 200 people showed up for the meeting. One of those who showed up was Tom DeVore. Let's hear what he had to say about kind of the difference in attitude between the people who were standing around the and those who were, let's say, the party establishment.
There is this wall. You can't see it, but it's there, between pretty much the people of Illinois that identify typically with Republican ideals and these group of establishment politicians who have been in that game a long time. That's fine. I respect them for that. There's no cohesiveness whatsoever.
So, Jeff, no cohesion, as he says, between those who were in the state party infrastructure. And basically, one of the things, we'll hear another comment from Tom DeVore. He made about an hour-long comment the other day, a very long presentation, in which he laid out just a whole number of complaints. But if we sum it up, pick that bite because it kind of says, there's just no cohesion. There's a big divide between those who view themselves as the party establishment and those who are the door knockers and the people you need, the foot soldiers, to go out and win elections. And as he said, there's a major divide. It's not just the money, which is an issue, but the party establishment are kind of thumbing their nose at the workers. And there was, to have that many people show up is unique. So what's your take on it without me going on?
Well, let me just say it's not that unique. When you take a look at the last 25 years, this thing goes in cycles. There are, from time to time, people who are dissident who show up. There's a battle between the so-called grassroots and the establishment. Been going on for at least 25 years, maybe people would say last half century. You can go back to Jim Edgar, Jim Thompson, George Ryan, Jim Ryan, Judy Partopinka, Bob Shalander. People who have been following this know those names. So this is not, I wouldn't say unique. It does mean something. Question is, what does it mean? Look, let's take a look at a little background that some folks may not know. There's some upheaval going on. There's an organization, a website that was run by Fran Eaton and others, actually going back to when Dan Proft was involved in a quarter of a century. A good, conservative, solid website that put publications.
And what's it called?
Illinois Review. People find it at IllinoisReview.com. Taken over recently in the last few months by Mark Vargas and Scott Casper. Vargas is a fairly well-known guy, does a radio show.
Mark Vargas used to work for the Bush administration in the Defense Department. He now has a weekly radio show up in Chicago. He's on once a week. He's basically a political consultant. He's very well connected both with Donald Trump and people in Washington at all kinds of places.
He's a Trump guy. And that's important to know, to keep in mind. He took that over, Illinois Review, bought it with Scott Casper. One's maybe say the executive editor-in-chief, the other's the executive editor, however they divide it. They shook it up, they changed the format a bit. Some would say for good, some would say for not so good. So that's going on. Those two guys are trying to make a name for themselves. They're trying to gin it up. I'm not saying that's bad, that's just a fact. And Casper ran, didn't do so well in the 6th congressional district primary, made some friends, made some enemies. That's a bit of background. Okay, and the other thing to know is the State Central Committee. These folks are elected by the committeemen in each congressional district. They tend not to be the congressmen. Of course, Republicans only have 3 of the 17 seats, so there couldn't be too many congressmen in that. But those 17 people elect, and I don't know that many of the people who were there protesting or dissenting on Saturday realize this. Those 17 people in the State Central Committee elect the Illinois GOP chair. They elected Don Tracy last February. He's been there almost a year. Some of those folks walk in and say, we're going to change this. Well, he was reelected this year, or he stays in that position. And unless they change the views, the majority of those 17 people, they don't change things. The GOP chair is similarly, the Chicago GOP chairman, Steve Bolton, is similarly elected. Sean Marson, Cook County GOP chairman, similarly elected. So these are some of the leaders that these folks said, we're going to change. Well, you want to change it? You're going to have to go around to the people who elected those people and make them vote for somebody else.
Let me bring in here for a minute. This is Illinois Review. This is one of the pages, and we see here one of their stories just to illustrate what we're talking about. That it says Illinois GOP points the fingers at Illinois Review Grassroots despite supporting Democrat Richard Irvin. So the divide here is goes back to the primary where we had some people, actually the Illinois establishment, putting together a slate, and as it came out, here we have another article, by the way. Illinois conservatives abandon GOP chair Don Tracy. Bailey and Ives can now seal his fate. So what we're seeing is this ongoing divide, and in this election year, you had this slate put out. I think Richard Porter was one of the architects, and they got money from Ken Griffin, who's now left the state. But Ken was going to put a lot of money behind Richard Irvin and these other people who were put together by the establishment. And basically, every one of those people on the slate put forth by the establishment Republicans did not win election. And that's kind of a big deal here. And so now what we have is that we have this ongoing divide, and it's a timely, let's bring up the comment here again from Tom DeVore, just part of that hour-long review analysis that he said what was going on, as he kind of points out that about 6 weeks before the election, he knew he wasn't going to win, and he said this is part of the problem. There's not the money and just the lack of support from the Republican establishment, and we'll follow up.
We didn't have the institutional fortitude to compete when we got consultants spending tens of millions of dollars, Mr. Uline's money, foolishly trying to get people to go vote on November 8th, the Democrats already had a well-organized infrastructure that already was gathering those ballots and getting those folks to vote before November 8th ever got here. There were over 800 mail-in ballots, 800,000 mail-in ballots cast. Over 800,000 this election cycle. It was over 20% of all of the ballots cast. And guess who they are predominantly? They're Democrats, because the Democrats go and get them.
So there you go. Basically, DeVore was saying not only, as we saw in the first clip, is there this divide, but there's just no support. So the Republican establishment wasn't working with their statewide candidates, never promoted them on their website, never gave them any money. In effect, this is like a closed group of the cool kids. And if you're not part of the cool kids, you don't get to sit at their table. And so there's really a problem here, I think, that is far more pronounced than what you had said in the past. I think before we leave, remember that when you were mentioning Jim Edgar and Jim Thompson and George Ryan and those guys, the Republicans held the governorship for 25 years in a row. And so you had a cohesiveness between who were the door knockers working the districts and those who were elected. Now
so
you don't. Well, I think I would disagree with you there on that one. But go ahead.
The senator from Springfield yield at some point. Okay, thank you very much. So really, you've got to go back to get some perspective. Some of the things that you just said were inaccurate, and the dissidents are saying things that are inaccurate. A lot of them, I don't think intentionally so, just like you're not intentionally saying so. They may just not have some of this information. The short of it is that Ken Griffin, they're complaining about lack of money, okay, and lack of support. It's not like the Illinois GOP supporting the cool kids. They didn't have much money. I think they raised about $2 million, Illinois GOP, which is actually fairly good for that kind of organization. But that can't compete with Pritzker, who's spending several hundred million, or the Illinois Democratic Party that gets zillions from unions. Okay, so
yeah, but Jeff, how do you explain that the Illinois GOP on their Facebook page and other ways just gave no acknowledgement? Didn't post anything, not one thing, about Darren Bailey, didn't post anything about Tom DeVore. They posted some things about Kathy Salvi, but they went out and grabbed Kathy Salvi at the 11th hour because they didn't basically have a candidate to run.
Terry,
I mean, that doesn't cost you money to mention someone on Facebook.
Okay, well, the senator from Springfield yield again. Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Martin. Look, we're going to take this slowly, folks, and we're going to spend most of the show on this topic because it is so important that you folks have the background, and we hope we're talking to some of the folks who were there on Saturday, who took their time, and we appreciate that, to go to the State Central Committee meeting. So let's go back for everybody and remind them, right around June of 2021, we had several candidates who had already announced they were running for governor of the state of Illinois in the Republican Party. Darren Bailey, Gary Rabine, Paul Schimpf, okay? They were in the race at that time, those three candidates. There were more. And notice there was no Richard Irvin at that time. So I think Ken Griffin, who was the 30 billion net worth guy, the guy who built Citadel over 30 years in Chicago, and has now moved to Florida. But he's sitting there at that time looking at those three candidates, and he says to himself, I don't think any of these three guys can win. And I think he talked to some of them, interviewed them, and perhaps his colleague, Kason Carter, did right around that time. And so he got in touch with some of his people, Kason Carter did, that he knew were involved in this. I would imagine one was Richard Porter, who I know was involved. I don't know exactly how it happened. Richard Porter is one of the two committeemen from on the RNC from Illinois, an influential guy in the Republican Party, has had that RNC position for 8 years, an important partner, a very successful partner at Kirkland and Ellis. knowledgeable guy. And Porter, I believe, in turn spoke with Sean Morrison, Cook County GOP chairman, who I believe got involved in talking with Mike Zarnakowitz, who's a longtime political consultant in Illinois, and also Kason Carter, who's Ken Griffin's government relations guy. And I think that, so that group, which is not really the Illinois GOP, started sitting down, talking to some of the other, again, to those folks who were the candidates, talking to others, and they decided, and Griffin decided, that these guys couldn't really beat Pritzker, okay? And Ken Griffin's main goal, when he as the head of Citadel, he wanted to have some major change. He was concerned about the crime in Chicago and other parts of Cook County and other parts of the state that were really impeding on his recruitment in his company headquartered here in Chicago. So it wasn't just selfish. He viewed that as that you had to get that crime down, or other companies were going to suffer as well, and the economy would take a nosedive in Chicago, the engine of growth for the state of Illinois. It's a kind motive on his part. It wasn't selfish at all. And
who wasn't selfish by whom?
By Ken Griffin, a man who was willing to donate $50 million if he had a candidate who he thought could win. And my point is, that's not the Illinois GOP. Richard Porter is the RNC guy, an important guy in the Illinois GOP, but that was not an Illinois GOP endorsement. I would say that was energized by Ken Griffin.
All right, let me insert here for go ahead.
Say Ken Griffin is an important guy because if Tom DeVore wants to have money when he gets the nomination, which he did, and I say I admire his tenacity.
Yeah, if he wants to get to the point.
Once he gets the money, he's going to need some people like Ken Griffin and Dick Uihlein and so forth to take on the hundreds of.
Well, he knows that. He's complaining that he didn't get a dime from the Illinois GOP. They got $2 million.
He didn't have the $50 million.
They have $2 million, Jeff?
We finished the story in 1 minute. Okay, in 1 minute. So these guys looked at it. They said these three can't win. They looked around. They found Richard Irvin. They decided Richard Irvin in sometime August or so, and they kept talking to him, and he was unveiled. We reported that.
You got to get to the point quicker here.
So the point is, these people didn't like Richard Irvin. Terry, I think you and I
don't think that you can make that point. I disagree with it. I don't think that's material. Well, you've been talking for about 5 minutes. All right, go. You got 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
I'm going to take the 5. Okay. Point is, they didn't like that. I thought Richard's a nice enough
Don't
guy.
say they didn't like it. Who are they?
The 100 or so people who were there.
So the grassroots didn't like Ken Griffin's money. Is that what you're saying?
It means all the grassroots. That portion didn't think that Richard Irvin would be a good representative.
I don't think they cared about. Oh, they didn't like. You're right. They didn't like Richard Irvin, right?
So let me.
Well, they said he was a Democrat, is what they said.
Right, and there were good reasons to be critical. And you and I'll speak for myself and see if you agree. I said at the time that Irvin, from what I knew, was going to have a tough time getting by winning the Republican primary.
Well, he was inarticulate, among other things.
Well, he was more articulate than they let on, because he was controlled by Mike Z, who didn't want to put him out there for interviews and was going to create a media candidate. Number one, he had some issues.
Well, and let's go back to what DeVore just said in that last bite, that how all these millions we wasted on consultants, right?
Well, it wasn't. Oh, yes, it was. The point is, if you wanted to, you had the wrong candidate for the Illinois GOP.
Let me bring something up here. We're getting a little bogged down. Hang on one second. So we have, this is from Illinois Review, again. The embarrassing GOP defeats left even members of the conservative billionaire Richard Uihlein inner circle mortified. Uline had donated $50 million to support conservative Grassroots nominee Darren Bailey and directed $10 million to Bailey's campaign and $42 million to pro-Bailey PAC. Talk to any conservative Grassroots candidate or woman-led activist groups this past election cycle, and a common theme emerges. They did not have the support of the Illinois GOP. And so that's what we consistently are hearing here of this divide, not just from Tom DeVore, but, you know, from the grassroots people. And I think Darren Bailey would much say the same thing.
Remind you, Jerry, look at some data that Darren Bailey got something like 1.7 million votes. So 1.7 million was not gotten from Democrats or independents. So when he says he didn't have the support of the Illinois GOP, I don't know who he means. They had 1.7 million.
Well, I think he means the establishment, the people on the Central Committee who, A, didn't give him any money, B, didn't post anything to promote his campaign.
They didn't have money to give.
There was no coordination, Jeff, between this. It's like the Central Committee guys are in a closet or in a private room, and they weren't even communicating with the people who the campaigns for governor, for attorney general, and others.
You can join the 70 people who were there and go on this rant, but it's not going to be very.
It's not a rant. It's I just showed you the documentation here of what the people are saying on Illinois Review and others.
When these people look, this you keep citing.
The reality is it's a perception. You can disagree with the perception.
You're citing to two people. You're citing to two people when you cite to the Illinois Review. Okay.
I'm citing them, Tom DeVore, Darren Bailey, and all the other activists who came to that meeting.
Mark Vargas and Scott Casper.
How about the evidence that there's no Republicans elected statewide?
Well, you had no money behind them, so they all lost by 10 to 14 points. Okay? That's not shocking when you have somebody spending hundreds of millions of dollars to elect the entire slate running on the Democratic Party, and you have these guys spending, I don't know, $40,000. It's ridiculous. What your people are. There are two things why you win races. No, there are three things. Let's go back to basics: blocking and tackling. You win races by having good candidates, by having a good message, a plan, and an agenda, and you have money. Those three things. I used to say MOM, message, organization, and money. MOM. Okay? I've known that for 25 years. You've known
well, the message is on the candidates. The organization should be both the candidates' campaign, but coordinated with the Republican Party. I think most people would say that's what's broken. There's just no coordination. Now, DeVore, again, he spoke for an hour, so one of the points he said here was that, you know, the Democrats are organized. The Democrats are going out and getting all these votes. As he said in the bite, 800,000 of the votes this election cycle came from mail-in ballots. The Republican establishment did nothing to go out and get these ballots, whereas the Democrats did.
Donald Trump's problem, okay? Trump has
Trump has nothing to do with the Illinois Central Committee not working.
The National GOP, of which Illinois is a part of that for the state of Illinois, they have bought into Trump's view. We can't have and support early voting, mail-in voting, too much fraud laden, so they don't do this. If we get to the RNC issue,
they can't blame it. I mean, you can say that. I mean, to say it's on Trump is ridiculous.
Pure and simple.
No,
Number one.
Well, okay. I'll disagree. That's ridiculous. Before we run entirely out of time, because we're playing this a little bit by ear here, we're at 24 minutes, so you got about 5 minutes left. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up? We also have the national somewhat disarray. The Republicans did take the House.
Before we go there.
Okay.
Since you've got 20 minutes, give me 2 or 3 minutes here. Okay. Used to be my show, folks, Public Affairs. Okay. It's just good nature rooming. Terry and I are the best of friends, right? I mean, we are, right, Terry? Just tell me. Oh, he's smiling. I'm not
Jeff,
sure.
you ignorant
Maybe
son.
we used to be. Okay. So anyway, folks, the other key point, Terry, remember I said message, plan, agenda? The Illinois GOP has not had a plan forever. They didn't have it this year. They haven't had it before. And when I say that, I mean not the leaders we're talking about just here. I'm talking about the Illinois House Caucus under Jim Durkin never had a plan for the 10 years, 14 years he was there. McConkey didn't, and before him, they didn't have a plan. We now have new leaders in the Illinois House and the Illinois Senate for the Republicans. We'll see.
I'll bring up, I have over your shoulder.
What do I mean by a plan? He should be, their agenda is to fix crime. They have people, they have resources. Go to WirePoints, they will lay it out for any state rep or any state senator who wants to adopt that. They can just take it right out of WirePoints, all the data they need to show how to reduce crime in the state of Illinois. You want to fix education, you want to fix that number.
Well, don't leave us hanging. Or do you know what they're saying? What is WirePoint saying is the way to fix crime in Illinois?
Yeah, you have to start.
But you got to make it quick here. Just give us the thumbnail.
You have to investigate, arrest, prosecute. You have to put them in jail while they're awaiting trial if they're dangerous.
In other words, you can't be doing the Safety Act, which takes effect in January, where you're going to be it's going to be a revolving door, and the cops who arrested someone are still in the office doing the paperwork, where the criminals are back on the street before the cops are done doing the paperwork.
You can't have probation, which puts people out after they're convicted. You got to say 2 years, 3 years. You got to keep them there. You can't parole them. You have to do the basics. Okay, we'll get to this when we talk about the mayoral race in Paul Vallis next week, maybe. But so that's one. Education, we only have 38% of the people around the entire state of the 2 million students around the entire state of Illinois who read at grade level. WirePoint shows that. Get the research for them. Talk about how you fix that. Okay, so you want to do, and parental control. We've lost control of the schools, public schools. What do we do about that? We don't have parental control. They were closed down in a bizarre move by the teachers' unions, and Pritzker went along with this. These are all the things that the Republicans...
And by the way, if we contrast this to the Republicans in the Senate, the Republicans in the U.S. Senate this week were trying to get a bill moved on school choice. So when you talk about the close down, and it was pointed out that the Catholic schools didn't close down and their kids are succeeding. We have all these public schools across the nation where kids have basically lost a whole year of their learning at grade level, which is the foundation of education.
Pritzker's buddies, the teachers' unions around the state of Illinois, want to clamp down on choice, want to exclude all charter schools, put caps on them.
So this is part of the agenda.
Why do the Republicans run on this?
Right, that's what we're saying. Part of the agenda. Now you've got new leaders. John Curran, the Republican Senate leader in the Illinois legislature, and Tony McCombie, the new Illinois Republican House leader.
They've been there 2 weeks. I haven't heard them say this.
Well,
how much time do they need?
This is not the time to be laying. This is not the time. If Tony McCombie here, a female Tony, not a. This is not the time when we're focusing on Christmas to be laying out your agenda. They'll do that, and they'll have that in the early part of the year.
Terry, give the people a Christmas present. Take what I just said and supplement it and say no more of this equity stuff. That's not helping blacks, Hispanics, or whites.
We only have a minute left here.
That's the new social issue. Don't ever close down the schools again. Don't ever lose a year of learning. Don't focus and obsess on this gender mutilation. Those are the new social issues. We're not talking life, which many people believe in the Republican Party. We're not even talking guns. What I've just said, they ought to be saying. Give them a Christmas present. Tony McCombie and John Curran, give your Illinois Republicans a Christmas present. Give them this agenda I've just articulated. They'll say thank you.
All right, so we got just seconds left, folks. We hope you have a great Christmas and New Year. Jeff and I will probably come back. If we don't see you before the end of the year, have a great time with your family. And we will see you in the new year.
We'll give you much more next time.
Bye now.
we don't disappoint, do we?